Hello Year 11, Miss Cole here. Final video from me, War Photographer by Carol-Anne Duffy. There she is. We remember her from Poetry Live. We really enjoyed that. So I'm going to try and talk quickly because I've been nowhere near hitting Miss Sendra's target of 5 minutes at any point. And I'm probably not going to now, but if I could get it under 10 minutes, I feel like that would be a massive achievement. So let's see how I get on. Probably badly. Let's first bear in mind the context then. Carol-Anne Duffy, hopefully we all remember, did not go to war. She was not a war photographer. This is not based on her experiences. Rather, it is inspired by her conversations with her friend, Don McCullum, who is a very famous war photographer, took a lot of pictures of the Vietnam War, which we'll all be familiar with, whether or not you can think of those off the top of your head or not. And she just thought that his job was really fascinating, that he went to war, took these incredible pictures exposing indescribable suffering, and then they'd be published and people would be so indifferent to them and so desensitized. And this poem is a reflection on that process, because that is never the intention of a war photographer. They take these images because they want to expose the truth to help end suffering, and that doesn't happen. So in terms of a message, this poem explores how desensitised we've come to the images of war. I think desensitised is your key word there. We've got more knowledge than ever before, and yet we do nothing with it. It shows the speaker's frustration that he is having no impact. And we can reflect on, is that really our fault? Or is it just indicative of just how commonplace war is? It is a fact of life. But arguably, from the perspective of the speaker, we should be speaking out against that. We know the truth now. It's not hidden like it was in Charge of the Light Brigade. Oh, firstly, form. The poem is written in regular stanzas. If I just zoom out very quickly, you can see that it is regular stanzas. And that is the speaker's attempt to bring order to the chaos of war. Okay, each one acts like a little bit of a snapshot, like a photo in a photo album, as we learn a little bit more about him and his job as we go through each stanza. Connected to that though, moving on to structure, is the rhyme within the stanzas. It's a little bit irregular. So if I look here, you've got then again, feet and he, but trays and dispel rhyme with nothing. They break the rhyme scheme. And that shows all the way through. It's like there's this attempt to have incredible order and incredible organisation, but it doesn't quite work. Like, as much as you try, as professional as he is, you can never completely bring order and sense to war. There is a cyclical structure in the poem. It starts up here with the photographer returning from war to develop his photographs. It ends down here with him going back again. And the, let's find it. The reason for that cyclical structure is to show us that war is ongoing. His images are having no impact. There is some caesura that is worthy of note. So up here, first stanza, you've got Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, each one a fragment separated by a full stop. Those full stops obviously cause the reader to pause. So why? There could be a couple of reasons. It could be about recontextualize it within the poem. This is the moment where he is starting to develop his photographs. Maybe it's the speaker's moment of reflection. These photographs lead him to remember all of these places that he has seen conflict, the extraordinary suffering that he has witnessed. But I think it's probably more for the intention of the reader. Hey, it reminds us that war and conflict affects every corner of the globe. It is not unique to one area. And I think the inclusion of Belfast is really key there, because we can probably assume that this is intended for a UK audience. Carol-Anne Duffy is British. So including a British city is a reminder that we are not immune from conflict and from war. It can equally affect us. You can develop your analysis of it also, because each of these are plosives. Got that harsh B sound. Belfast, Beirut, and then Phnom Penh. Those P's as well, also plosives. To remind us of the harshness of war and the harsh reality that it is everywhere. Second example is here, rural England is embedded within that stanza to show how protected we are in rural England. We're completely disconnected. And it juxtaposes that image below of those children running in a nightmare heat. Another thing we could comment on structurally is how it is written in iambic pentameter. So, iambic pentameter, if you remember, is where you have got these 10 syllables per line. You've got stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. Okay, so I've demonstrated that on this final line here, how there are 10 syllables. And iambic pentameter generally creates a bit of a conversational tone. And I think, therefore, we need to think, why has he written it in iambic pentameter? Couple of reasons. In terms of the conversational tone that it kind of creates, maybe he's inviting conversation. These pictures are not taken with the intention that you move on from them. He wants to open up conversations and debates and discussions. He wants us to talk about them because through talking, hopefully it will lead to action. Also, iambic pentameter is very controlled. So it links to those other things that we mentioned earlier, those regular stanzas trying to bring order to this chaos, the attempt at rhyme that fails. Okay, so it's more of an attempt to control the structures. Finally, on that note, it's worth looking at where iambic pentameter is broken, because it is at times. And in the first stanza, there are a couple of examples that might be worth mentioning. So the first one is with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. That breaks the iambic pentameter because there are 12 syllables in that line. And this is the moment where he is first seeing all of these pictures that he has taken. He's laying them out to develop. And I think that shows his overwhelm, just how much suffering he's succeeded in capturing. And the next one is, as though this were a church and he... Now that doesn't need to end there. So I think it's cut short on purpose. So this breaks the pentameter because it is too short. And I think that's to show the inadequacy of his darkroom for dealing with these quite sacred images that are dealing with matters of a person's death. And that brings us quite nicely onto language. Because when we're looking at language, what we want to start looking at is religious imagery, used especially in that initial stanza. So, worth remembering, Carol Ann Duffy is Catholic. And some of the language is related to that. So in the church, in the dark room, it's saying the only light is red and softly glows. So that is photographic language. That is what would happen in a dark room. And you do have that sort of semantic field of photography all the way through, very obviously. But often I think it has also a metaphorical meaning. So within a Catholic church, there is always a light. There is always a candle lit, softly glowing. And that is to remind us of the ever-present nature of God. God's light is always there. Despite the suffering, despite the challenges we face, God is always present. And I think as the photographer is dealing with issues of death, that's probably something he's bearing in mind. Looking at those images, it probably looks hellish. It's just a reminder that God is there. God isn't absent, despite what he is seeing, which might make him doubt that. The use of the word red is always something interesting to analyse, because it can have so many meanings, be so symbolic. So red, straight away, you've got sort of danger, blood, urgency, importance, connotations there. But also, it's a red light. And when we say red light, I think we do, our minds do think of a red light district, which is, if you don't know, a place where a prostitute would go in order to find work. And I think there is a bit of an undertone that possibly the speaker questions whether he's actually exploiting the people in these images by profiting from them. And that's picked up later, and I'll go into that in a bit. As he's developing these pictures, he says that it's as though he is a priest preparing to intone a mass. So seeing himself as almost, this process as quite sacred. He has witnessed a person's last moments, and during Mass, a lot of the words that are said are reminders of actions of people on the edge of death, and that's what he'll be seeing in those pictures. So it does relate to Mass in that sense. And I think these sort of religious Catholic links are reminders that these images are deserving of reflection, because he is dealing with issues of life and death. And to not respect them is actually sacrilegious. The other biblical reference is at the end of stanza 1, all flesh is grass, and that is from the Old Testament, Isaiah. And that is a reminder of the transitory nature of human life. Human life is transient and it is fragile. And I think that he possibly reminds himself of that in order to rationalise what he is doing, because the images he'd be seeing would be so awful that he would need to rationalise them in order to deal with them in a professional way. Moving on, developing that photographic language, got that then metaphor, solutions, slop and trays, photographic solutions, but equally what he hopes that his images will be, they will help be a solution to conflict by alerting people to the horrors of war. A stranger's features twist a half-formed ghost, so that describes a man he is photographing in his final moments. That verb twist evokes an image of pain and suffering and discomfort. Half-formed ghost, again, has got that dual meaning. When you're developing a traditional photograph, it is white before the features start to emerge. They might look a little bit ghostly. But equally, half-formed ghost, this is the man's dying moments, like he's halfway towards death. And then finally, the end of the poem. The pictures end up in Sunday's supplement, and it's worth contemplating that word supplement. The supplement is something extra. Usually a Sunday supplement will contain the soft news, not the headlines. So things that aren't considered urgent, usually it's a lot of like celebrity news and gossip or opinion pieces. And it shows the war is so commonplace that it's not even considered worthy of being in the main paper. It's in the bit that's extra that not everybody will read. Also, here that then links to the reader's eyeballs prick with tears between bath and pre-lunch beers. Look at that verb prick there, being a short, sharp pain. So yeah, we reflect that, oh God, that's awful, but we move on from it so quickly. And it's between bath and pre-lunch beers, and that gives the sense this is a routine. It's just fitted into our daily lives. We don't even contemplate the significance of what we're seeing anymore. And then that takes us to the final line. He earns his living and they do not care. And I think you can link that to that red light district and his contemplation of what's the point? He's doing this, we believe, with a moral purpose to try and raise awareness and bring an end to suffering. But he knows that it's not working. He knows that people are desensitized and they're not looking. And if that is true, and he knows that, by continuing to return and continuing to profit from these images, is he exploiting the people? And I think he has a bit of a moral crisis considering that. I'm way over time again, so I'm going to really quickly go through the links. I really like this poem, and I know a lot of you do too, because it is really clear. There's loads to comment on. There's lots of links. Charge of the Light Brigade, got the lack of power afforded to those reporting conflict. Remains exposure, bayonet charge, exposing the reality or effects of conflict. Emigre, poppies, kamikaze, the effect of war on those who are not directly involved. Ozymandias tissue, less obvious ones I think, but got the fragility of human life and how we attempt to record it in order to preserve it. So this is the longest one ever. Thank God it's the last one you've got to hear from me. I hope it has been helpful.